friends, Andy Roszak here with the Early Childhood Chats podcast. Thank you so much for joining us on this very special edition where we look at the impacts that the federal shutdown, which is now almost a month old, is having on our children, on our families, and on our communities. Stick with us. You're not going to want to miss this very important episode with our friends from the First 5 Years Fund. Well, hello, everybody, and welcome back to a very special episode here of the Early Childhood Chats podcast. Andy Roszak joining you as always, and happy to be joined by special guest this week, Sarah Rubinfield over at the First 5 Years Fund. Look, we wish we didn't have to have this conversation, you all, but as you know, we've been kind of trumpeting this for the last several weeks now. There are some really big impacts that are starting to pile up with the continuing government shutdown. And Sarah has been nice enough to join us this week to kind of chat through all of this. What does it mean for families? What does it mean for children? What does it mean for Head Start? What does it mean for childcare? And really help us unpack this. And Sarah, thank you so much for being here. I wish it was under happier situation and circumstances, but I do appreciate your willingness to come on and really talk through the drastic impacts that we're seeing now and certainly about to see in much greater depth and detail here.
Yeah, Andy, thanks so much for having me on today. I have the pleasure of regularly meeting with members of Congress and congressional staffers to really explain how childcare works and why it's so important for so many families across the country. But we are in a tough position about the government shutdown, and I'm excited to chat about it today.
Well, absolutely. And I guess before we get into that, can you maybe introduce yourself? Tell folks who you are, what you do, all the great work you've been involved with. I know you're definitely a policy veteran when it comes to these issues. So we're really happy to have you here and pick your brain on these issues today.
Yeah, sure. I'm really excited that I'm able to join you. After spending about a decade and a half on Capitol Hill myself, working for members of Congress. As I mentioned, I now have the pleasure to work on childcare and early learning federal programs. So I get to spend my days talking to members of Congress and their staffers about why childcare is so important, but also why federal investments really help provide the foundation that all of our programs are built upon. There's two really main things I always try to get across that I want folks to know. One, childcare is baked into everything. It keeps parents working. It helps prepare our youngest learners for school so they can, be ready to succeed and sit still and listen and be able to be successful students. But also it keeps communities together and thriving. But the bottom line is it's expensive and it's really, really hard to find. And so the second point is that when childcare is hard to find and that sort of breaks down, everyone feels it. Employers feel it, parents feel it, our youngest learners certainly feel it. And our economy loses an estimated $122 billion a year alone just because of the lack of childcare, due to things like lack of productivity, revenue, wages, it impacts everything. And so it's all really intertwined and the federal government and federal programs play a really key role in all of that.
Yeah, and if, not to go too deep into a history lesson, but, you think about 61, almost 62 years ago, back when we kind of started having the federal entry into the early childhood space. Obviously, Senator Kennedy, a major player in that space. And, so we really have two big buckets, right? We've got the Head Start bucket, directly funded grantees. And then we've got the Child Care Development Block Grant, which is more of a block grant to states, which, help fund our child care resource and referral agencies, our CCR&Rs that are out there, our child care awares, and everybody. And it just it's not lost on me. 61 years ago, we had a very, very different demographic in the United States. Fast forward to now, gosh, we've got so many parents in the workforce, dad and mom, by the way, that, this funding now is even more important than it was, 60 some years ago when this whole scheme started. So can you talk a little bit about kind of the importance here, what we're seeing with the government shutdown, how that's starting to impact programs, and kind of against the backdrop of, we know kids are in childcare an average of 36 hours a week. To your point, suddenly if that goes away, oh my goodness, what is that going to do to our industries, our economy, our communities, our just whole fabric of society that, quite frankly, without childcare, we can't work. And I think the economic impacts here are simply staggering when you really start to think about what's about to happen.
Yeah, well, let me start by talking about the core programs and what we mean when we say Head Start and childcare. So, as you mentioned, Head Start was created just over 60 years ago. And the program is really intended to support children and families that really need the most support in our communities. So, we're talking a family of four that makes less than $32,000 a year. These are families that sometimes are experiencing things like homelessness or between jobs, and they just need extra support to really help keep the family unit strong and make sure those kids can thrive when they get to school. So, in addition to high quality care and education for the youngest learners, it also provides really important wraparound services that help keep the whole family strong and, in turn, the community. So, things like health, nutrition screenings, support for parents, helping place them into jobs or helping first time new parents just figure out how to be a parent. Sometimes it's really challenging. And so this is a program that really helps support families, the whole family, in a very local, community-driven way. And we've seen tremendous results from kids that graduate from Head Start, ready to learn, and really succeed in school. And then and that program serves about 650,000 children every year in our country. And over the years, it's served, I think, close to 40 million kids. It's really been a tremendous program with a lot of success. And we kind of view it as sort of the gold standard in terms of what we hope every little child gets to have in terms of support and learning as they grow. Those first 5 years, I know that it's a little clever, but at first 5 years fund, we say that the first 5 years really last forever for a child. And that's because that's when their brain is growing. 90% of brain development happens in those first 5 years. So we really can't invest enough and give enough support to our littlest learners. And then the other core program that you mentioned is the Child Care Development Block Grant, which then serves sort of those families just above in the next rung. So we're talking families that don't necessarily qualify for Head Start, but are still really working and struggling to make ends meet. So it varies state by state, but we're talking families making $40,000, $50,000 a year in a state, and these vouchers help them find childcare that best fits their needs. So they get a voucher from the state or a subsidy, and they can use it for the type of care that works best for them, whether it's faith-based care, in-home care, center-based, it really gives parents the options. So these are two really wonderful programs that are run by the federal government. They've long had very strong bipartisan support, which I know is a rare thing these days,
Yeah.
but happy to say there still is very strong bipartisan support for both of these programs. And again, it comes back to making sure our youngest learners are prepared when they enter kindergarten, ready to succeed, and supporting parents' ability to go to work and provide for their family. Because at the end of the day, that's really what parents want to be able to do. Is really just be able to provide for their family, but also have that peace of mind while they're at work that they know their child is in a safe place, they're learning, and they're getting ready to succeed in school.
So I know we've seen a lot of cuts this year, a lot of kind of non-traditional approaches to government. As a person with a Master of Public Administration degree, it's stuff that was never in any textbook I've ever seen. And certainly during my time on the Hill, nothing I've ever seen. I'm suspecting same for you as well.
Yeah.
Uh, um, you know, the, quite frankly, though, with the government shutdown being I guess we're almost a month, maybe almost closer to over a month now, we're starting to really see some impacts. And as you just alluded to, these are tremendous, tremendous impacts that we're seeing on families that are not doing all that great to begin with. Several of them are struggling, several of them are
Right.
just trying to make ends meet, as you already kind of referenced. In some cases, Head Start is really the only spot the kid is getting those two hot meals a day. And
Mhm.
I'm worried now as we start to see kind of the cascade of this government shutdown. We're not just talking about some, pie in the sky program that no one's ever heard about, studying lab rats for X, Y, or Z. Like, we're not even talking
Right.
about that. We're truly talking about impacts to daily life, to the food, the nutrition, the well being, the health of our children, our youngest, and certainly our community as well. And it's hard to even wrap your head around that and quantify that. What are some of the real impacts that we're starting to see? I know several of the Head Starts had an October 1st start date, so I guess maybe we should clarify that. Fiscal years can vary based on these programs and Head Start.
Yeah.
They don't all start at, January 1st. They don't all start,
Right.
with the federal fiscal year. So as we kind of progress in this delay of funding the government gets longer and longer, you're starting to see many programs that are up against a November 1st date, and we certainly saw programs up against an October 1st date that never actually got their notification of award, which means they haven't gotten refunded. They're not getting funds. Essentially, they are just drawing down on any other sources, any other income they can find to kind of keep the doors open. But as I'm sure everyone understands, that's just not sustainable in the long run. So, what are some real big concrete impacts we're going to start seeing in the next, really in about the next few days or week or so?
Yeah, well, as you laid out, the Head Start grants. So these are grants that go from the federal government in Washington, D.C. to directly to the local community, to these providers providing the Head Start program to the community. They are all in a different grant cycle. So, as you said, we had six programs that were supposed to get funding October 1st. Now, fortunately, they've been able to, as you said, tap into any other sorts of funding in their local community to keep those doors open. They're sort of unique, though, in that they're either connected to a larger entity like a school district or other community programs. So they've been able to be able to make it this far, but we're not quite sure how much longer. But the real concern though is November 1st, which is just 2 days away. 134 programs will not get funding for Head Start. These 134 programs serve about 65,000 children, and they're in 41 different states. So we're talking about a pretty large impact. That's 65,000 children who could be impacted. Again, every Head Start program is a little bit different. They all have a little bit different funding, whether, again, depending on if they work closely with other community programs or the local school district. The impact it'll vary from program to program, but it really is many of them are at risk of closing their doors. And that is the real concern here. It's really challenging to watch this partisan gridlock at the expense of our youngest learners and the concern that some of these programs, they might be able to make it a week, maybe 2 weeks, but, at some point they're going to start closing their doors. And that means they're going to lose staff. Staff will go on to other jobs. And so reopening, it's a lot of them, it's not like you just flip the lights back on and everything's back to normal overnight. So this can have really tremendous impact over time. And the longer this goes, the bigger the impact it's going to have on these children and families.
Well, and this is also compounded with some of the stuff we saw happen earlier in the year. We basically lost
Mhm.
half of the regional offices. We went from 10
Mhm.
down to 5. So, the actual federal employees that are still around that are able to process these grants, handle technical assistance, oversee, all the different agreements and the program standards, we're a little bit from a deficit there too. So I am concerned about the longer it goes, the bigger the backlog and how quick can we clear that backlog off. And I think, gosh, by the latest estimates I've seen, we're talking about what, 65,000 kids that may be losing,
Yeah.
access to care here in the next few days.
Yeah.
In
And if you think
addition,
about that
go ahead.
too, sorry, not to cut you off, but
Yeah.
65,000 children, that means 65,000 parents that they don't know if they can go to work, right?
Yeah.
You can't
Or
go to
maybe
work.
times two if you get talk about
Right,
mom and
or maybe
dad,
times two. So that is
right.
a lot of parents that are impacted that may not be able to go to work. That means their employers are not going to have their employees at work, their reliable workforce that they depend on every day to show up and do their jobs. So it really does have a cascading impact.
And I think, too, obviously we focus with a laser here on early childhood, but like the government shut down. I mean,
Mhm.
here in Washington, D.C., the Smithsonian's are shut down, the National Mall is shut down. We're seeing, cascading effects now at airports and other places. But I think importantly for us, big programs, SNAP and WIC and programs that provide, food assistance and other really crucial, pillars of community support are also not being funded. So at the same time, you not only are you losing your early childhood education and your child care program, but now you're also using access to food stamps and perhaps your heating assistance as we start to turn now into the fall and winter. And so many other of those really important, social programs that, again, our families truly do rely on day to day to make ends meet and to keep that family functioning.
Yep. Whereas one day a child is getting, 3 square meals a day, whether at home through the food programs you mentioned or at their program at the Head Start Center, really concerned about what will happen to those children. I think 1 in 5 kids rely on SNAP benefits. And you couple that with the 65,000 children that are in these Head Start programs, and the impacts can be really dire. I know you've been
Yeah.
visiting various Head Starts recently. What have you heard or seen on the ground?
Well, yeah, I've got the honor and the privilege. I'm in, Head Starts every week, and it's, look, we've struggled. I don't think it's a big secret. We've talked about it at length here at the podcast. We've struggled with recruitment and retention. We have an industry that has about 45% annual turnover. We constantly are struggling to fill those, teacher seats and make sure we maintain that high quality standard. And quite frankly, things like this are not helping. When you don't even know if your program's going to be open the next week, if you don't know if you're going to get a paycheck, if you think you're going to be asked to, work without pay or take, a month off unpaid. And, quite frankly, in some jurisdictions, you can go work at Walmart, McDonald's, Taco Bell, and about be at the same, wage level. So,
Right.
that also concerns me that we're seeing a lot of staff now saying, is this really worth it? We're not appreciated. We're called babysitters most of the time. We don't get respected, which is so different because you think back to the COVID days and all of a
Right.
sudden everybody was essential and this was the best thing that could
Right.
happen and
Right.
all this stuff. And boy, how times have changed in just a couple of
Mhm.
short years. So I do get, really worried about that. And then, obviously I do a tremendous amount of work in emergencies and disasters and going into communities after tragedy has struck. And by the way, like our hearts and everything's with the folks in Jamaica. I mean, I lived and worked in Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands for 3 years, helping those programs after those hurricanes. And
Mm.
what we're seeing come out of Jamaica is nothing short of horrific. But the thing that you think about in those, in any kind of emergency disaster, when people start to get stressed, we also usually see an accompanying uptick in domestic violence. And that's one of the things, again, kind of these associated, unintended consequences I'm worried about with the loss of that social safety net. You lose your child care, you lose your SNAP, you lose your LIHEAP, you lose your WIC, you use all that stuff. And guess what? That puts a tremendous amount of stress on our families. And sadly, if it follows like most natural disasters do in that time of stress, we see a massive uptick in domestic violence. And, I'm worried about that too, quite frankly. So I really hope that members of Congress can come together and look, if you don't want to pass one big, beautiful bill or put everything all together, which I get,
Right.
these are complicated issues. I've
Right.
I've long been an advocate of the line item veto and one issue,
Right.
one bill, and let's not, complicate things. But it's interesting to me, the traditional levers that usually get politicians back to the negotiating table don't seem to be resonating. I mean, usually if we
Mhm.
find out the military is going to miss a paycheck, my gosh, every elected member of Congress is running to the table to try to pass a stopgap or a couple week continuation or something. And I don't know from my angle, from what I'm seeing, I just don't see any urgency. I don't see any real spirit of collaboration. I don't really even see any discussions that are, I mean, at least publicly going on. So this impasse is very troubling to me, Sarah. I don't know how we get past this in a meaningful way without, damaging a lot of society and a lot of the communities that are already, struggling to make ends meet.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. We're about 29, 30 days into this shutdown at this point. It's been an entire month and we haven't seen any progress. And I think people are starting to really feel concerned and frankly frustrated on all sides and just want Congress to get back to work and provide these services for children and families. I can tell you we're doing all that we can to keep up the pressure. Yesterday, we sent a statement up to Congress with 130 state and national organizations signing on, telling them to not shut down Head Start, don't shut down families, but get back to work and open up the government. Thousands of phone calls and emails into congressional offices to help remind them what these impacts are. Again, we're talking 42 states, or 41 states, excuse me, in Puerto Rico, and 134 programs. And if God forbid we get to December, it's going to be another 120 programs. It just continues to compile and build on itself. So, we're doing all that we can to keep up the pressure. Again, I'm not sure that Head Start will be the single thing that breaks the gridlock, but it's all collective on all the various issues and impacts, as you mentioned, from the airports to the military to the food programs to Head Start. I think it has to be collective and putting the pressure on Congress to finally come back to the negotiating table and figure something out.
Well, and I think that brings up a great point here. If you are impacted by this, if you are concerned
Mhm.
about this, if you don't like what's happening, make your
Mhm.
voice heard, right? And
Yep.
I mean, certainly reaching out to your member of Congress. We know, each state has two senators, and you've got a
Right.
representative, and and I know Sarah can probably talk at great length about the committees and how those work and all this kind of stuff.
Right.
But I mean, truly, the advocacy here from the ground up, because look, elections aren't that far away, right? We're going to have some
Mhm.
other elections here coming up, and I think reminding our elected officials that hey, you guys can play your little games, you can have your little political spats, but right
Mhm.
now, like it's getting beyond that. It's actually hurting people, and that's not
Mhm.
okay.
Yeah.
You can figure out things, but let's at least pass a stopgap and continue to fund these very, very, very important programs. So how would you recommend folks kind of reach out? How would that process look? I know you guys have been doing a tremendous amount of,
Yeah.
trying to get all the sheep in the order or whatever the saying is. How would you recommend people kind of plug into your apparatus and what you guys have been up to?
This is always one of my favorite topics. After I worked in Congress for 15 years, I encourage anyone and everyone, always call your member of Congress. Don't be shy. Visit their offices, both back home in the district, here in DC. You're their constituents. They should want to hear from you. And you should use every opportunity to make your voice heard. You're competing with a lot of other issues and priorities. So I always say you can never bug them enough. It's okay. A lot of people bug them on a lot of issues. So it's really, really important to make your voice heard. And I think the other thing I want people to know is, we've been very fortunate. Again, as I mentioned, this is an issue that has such strong support across the spectrum, especially even for our core programs, Head Start, and as I mentioned, the Child Care Development Block Grants. These are programs that haven't, fortunately, knock on wood, seen cuts even this year. It's an area where everyone agrees we need to maintain this funding. We continue to push for more funding for these key programs, but it is an area where there's support. And we've also seen it amongst voters. We just finished a poll of rural American voters recently, a couple weeks ago, and seeing such strong support. 78% of rural Americans support programs like Head Start. They know it's the only option often for childcare and quality early learning. And across party lines, see these programs as really a lifeline for children, but also the entire community and the broader impacts that it has. So it's a great issue to engage members of all kinds of members of Congress across the spectrum. It's an issue that voters agree on in every community. And so it's an easy one to talk to members of Congress about. And there's no reason why there shouldn't be broad agreement to continue to make these programs a priority and make sure Congress gets back to work so these Head Start programs get the funding they so desperately need to continue these programs for children and families.
Yeah, and I will say, and I'm curious your experience, but working
Mhm.
in the Senate, I took a lot of member meetings, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's pretty much all day
Yeah.
long. And
Yeah.
some of those are what you would think. Typical DC, a lobbyist comes in, blah blah blah. They got their talking points, this and that,
Yeah.
and quite frankly, those are important, but they're kind of boring because they're all the same, right?
Right.
Well,
Right.
I think the ones that were most memorable and the ones that were most impactful are the ones from the people really
Mhm.
in the communities. And
Yes.
I mean, it sounds stupid, but I got a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old. Even just
Hmm.
bringing in a picture they drew with crayons and saying,
Hmm.
"Hey, my 2-year-old drew this for you,"
Yep.
it goes a tremendous way because now you've attached a personal connection,
Yep.
right? To this is important. My 2-year-old drew this. They're in a Head Start program. It's going to be closed. I want you to remember, little Evelyn when you are making these decisions. And oftentimes you'd go into the senator's office and
Mhm.
that would be what was on the desk, right? The
Right.
cards, the
Right.
drawings, the pictures. So,
Exactly. Yeah.
if you're a parent out there, somebody, please don't think that your voice is not important. I mean, in many,
Right.
many ways, you've got more clout and more power and more reach and certainly more heartstrings than most of
Right.
these paid lobbyists that come in, all day, every day. So
Right.
certainly take advantage of that. Tell your story.
Yep.
These are elected officials that are there to elect you, or I'm sorry, you elected them to serve you.
Mhm.
Make your voice known, especially in this time of crisis, and hopefully we can break some of this logjam. I know the other thing, which we probably need to give a big shout out. There's a lot of community partners out there just going
Mhm.
tremendously above and beyond. As
Yep.
you mentioned, our CAP agencies and
Mhm.
our YMCA's and excuse me, our food banks. They're really trying to do all they can do.
Yep.
But let's be honest, this isn't something that's going to be sustainable in the long term, just
Right.
looking at the magnitude and the numbers that we're truly talking about here today. So if you do have that opportunity, contribute, donate, volunteer, help out some of these organizations that are really trying to fill this critical gap. They're doing tremendous amount of work.
Mhm.
They don't often get the credit, but they
Right.
really are serving right now in this crucial time as lifelines to those communities. And I did just want to give them a big shout out because it's truly heroic what they're doing in many different communities out there.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think that they're under tremendous stress that I don't know that many of them have seen before. And so you're exactly right. I think we want to support and lift them up as much as we can. And again, some of these measures might be able to last a week or two, but Congress really needs to get back to work. The longer this goes, the worse it's going to get. And of course, we're all starting to turn towards after Halloween. Thanksgiving is just around the corner, and gonna be a lot of hungry families if this thing continues to keep going. So, couldn't agree more. Really appreciate all the work that the local communities are doing to step in and sort of fill the gap in the meantime.
Well, if folks want to follow your work, if they want to learn more about
Mhm.
what you all are doing, I know this is, I hate to say it's not typical, but
Yeah.
sadly, in the last few years, we've been having a lot of these battles with,
Right.
all
Right.
sorts of administrations about funding and, cost of increase and cost of living adjustments and all of this. So you guys have been very active. You've been a very reliable, reputable source. I appreciate, a lot of, look, this isn't really politics. This is kids, right? I mean,
Right.
as you
Right.
mentioned, if you're Democrat, Republican, Independent, somewhere in between, whatever, we all want kids to do good in life. And I don't think
Right.
this is really a controversial issue. And I
Yeah.
appreciate kind of the balanced approach you've taken, data and facts, and
Mhm.
because it's easy to get into the bomb throwing, and that's not really all that productive in today's
Right.
climate or
Right.
environment. So, how do
Right.
folks find out more about kind of what your work, what you're up to, and all the great services that you guys offer?
Yeah, sure. No, and we really appreciate that. Thank you so much, Andy. So First 5 Years Fund, you can find us on our website at ffyf.org. Pretty straightforward and simple. From there, we have updates that you can sign up for. You can get daily news clips about childcare and early learning. We have state of plays that go out once a week, and all sorts of updates that you can stay up to date on what the latest is for childcare and early learning. So we appreciate it, and come check out some of the resources that we have.
Love it, love it. I'm trying to get Sarah. We got to talk offline. I want to get her down to the Head Start East conference in March in Puerto Rico. We're going to have a great time. Registration's open now. The early bird registration is open. So Head Start East will be having their conference March 2nd through the 5th. I was checking the data today. Gosh, we've already got over 17 states represented at the
Amazing.
conference. So,
Amazing.
it should be good. Last time we did a conference in Puerto Rico, we had almost 1,000 Head Start and early childhood
Yeah,
folks show up. So,
that's awesome.
hopefully, we can get past all of this, and come March, we can get together and really talk about these critical issues of, how do
Mhm.
we learn from each other? What are the best practices? Well, the thing that you see time and time again is if you're going through it, guess what? Somebody else is going through it too.
Right.
And we are
Right.
definitely stronger together when we collaborate and share our stories and our solutions. So, love to get you down there to Puerto Rico, and hope to see everybody on the podcast down in Puerto Rico. HeadStartEast.org has got more information on that. Well, I'll give you the
I love
final
it.
word, Sarah.
I will say I love any opportunity to spend time with providers, the young children. I mean, the providers are really the ones that are doing the hard work here. Let's be honest, day in and day out, they are really doing the true hard work and the amazing work. And I love spending any opportunity I get to spend with providers. I love it. So
Absolutely. Well, come down. I'll buy the first pina colada. We can have a
sounds
drink
great.
and share it together. Well, thank you so much for being here, Sarah. Again, I wish this was under some happier
Yeah.
times, but I do appreciate you keeping it real and talking about the impacts. And I hope this has really empowered and inspired everybody listening to get involved, make your voices heard, and continue to talk about the importance of these programs on you, on your family, on your friends, on your neighbors, on your community. And I hope the next time that we see each other, we'll have much better news to report. So for the Early Childhood Chats podcast, this is Andy saying thank you very much for joining us. Thank you so much for Sarah and all of her colleagues, and we'll see you on the next podcast.